In the fourth part of the tutorial, we will continue developing our library management application. If you haven't watched part 1, 2, and 3, please watch them now. In the part 3 of the tutorial, we have implemented the use cases of the administrator. In this part, we will implement use cases of staff members. If you recall use cases of the staff member, the first 6 of them are very similar to the goals of the administrator users. They all aim to create, update, and delete items and members. Just to remind you that creation of a staff member was implemented as a separate menu item, while in order to update or delete a staff member, the user had to locate the staff member first by running a query using a search form. There is nothing wrong with this approach, but to give you more exposure to some of the AwareIM features, we will implement similar use cases that a staff member user will perform with library items and members using a slightly different user interface approach. We will define a query that will look for all available items or members. This query will display the first page only, and then the user will be able to find a particular instance by using a filter available for the query. After the user finds the instance, he will be able to edit or delete it. The query will also have an operation to create a new instance of the item or member. So all possible operations, creating an item, editing an item, and deleting an item, will be available inside a single query. Let's define this query for the item object. So as we said, the query will look for all instances of the item object. We have it automatically selected here already. Let's sort the results by title. Let's now go to the display options of the query and select the attributes that we want the query to show. So we will have code, title, author, whether it's available or not, and picture. Just like queries for staff members, our query will have edit and delete operations. So let's define them. To make it more interesting, let's direct the output of the edit operation to a modeless window. This will make it possible for the user to open several items at once and keep them on the screen. Now let's define the delete operation that will allow staff members to delete individual items. Let's now define filters for the query. We will allow filtering by title, author, and code. And we will display filters as a separate row. Let's now define an operation that will allow users to create a new item. So we go to Panel Operations and add the new operation of the create object type. And the object that will be created is item. We will direct output of the operation to a pop-up window so that our query remains on the screen while the new object is being created. Let's select an icon for this operation. I will use classes of the font Awesome Font that AwareIM includes by default. This class should create a nice plus icon. So we have our operation here. After the item has been created, we want our query to automatically refresh itself to show the new item. So we go to the auto refresh options of the query and add the item object to the auto refresh list. Let's also add the delete operation that will allow users to delete multiple selected items at once. This should be a panel operation. We specify the name for our query and save it. Before we can test it, let's make sure that the form of the item object looks good. We'll get rid of this loans attribute here. Fix this label. Increase the width of the title. Put the picture attribute into its own column. And make the form a little bit bigger. And maybe put label above control here. Well, this looks good for now. Okay, now that the form of the item looks good, let's add our query to the menu of the staff member visual perspective. Let's change the widget type of the menu to toolbar. Get rid of the standard menu item, because this item is for administrators only. And let's add a new item called Manage Items. And this menu item will run our query. Let's see now how this works. I put the version under test and start the browser. Note that I'm logging in as a staff member user that we have created before. So now I can see the Manage Items button, and when I run it, an empty list is displayed because we don't have any items yet. Let's create a couple of items using the new operation. So the pop-up form is displayed, and we can start adding the details of the new item. I have actually made a mistake, and behind the scenes I have fixed the form a little bit by adding a few blank lines here to compensate for the biggest image that can be displayed on the form. Otherwise, the image would stick out of the form. Okay, when we click Create, the new item is displayed in the query because it automatically refreshes itself when the new item is created. But here is another mistake. The image inside the query looks too big. We need to scale it down. To do this, we go to the presentation options of the picture attribute. Click on Display Settings and then select when displaying picture in query results form and scale picture to 60 by 60 pixels. And one other thing I forgot to do in our query, in the filters, the default operator should be starts with rather than equals. This makes a lot more sense. Let's see now how this works. So now when we go back to the browser and run our query, we can see that the picture looks much better now. Let's create another item. Now that we have a couple of items, we can see how filters work. All the user has to do is enter a few letters of the filter and the query will show matching items. We can filter by any combination of attributes that we have available. And we can clear the filter by clicking this button here. The user can click on the Edit button and see the form of the item displayed as a pop-up window. We can minimize it, and the user can have as many windows available on the screen as he wants. And the user can click on the Delete button to delete individual items, or select several items and press Delete button here. Let's do the same thing for the member object. First, we'll define the query for library members in very much the same way we did it for items. So we define a new query, give it a name, select the member object, and we will sort it by name. Then for the displayed options, we will select name, address, email address, and membership number. As the attributes to be displayed. Then we'll define edit and delete operations. Direct the output to the modeless window. Then we will add the create new operation. Create object, member. Output will be in the pop-up window. And we'll define an icon from the font Awesome. Then we'll define the delete panel operation to delete several selected items. Then we'll define our filters. We will use all attributes as filters. And finally, we'll define auto refresh options of the query. Let's now polish the form of the member object. Let's remove unnecessary attributes first. Put membership number first. Fix the width of the form. Insert a new column. And put login name and password into this column. Then put label above controls for this column. And anchor it to the right edge. And then do the same with this column. Okay, and now for this loans attribute here, let's define attributes to be displayed. And merge this cell. Okay, now the form looks good. Note also that when a member is being created, we do not need to show the membership number attribute, as this will be calculated automatically. And we also do not need to show the loans of the member, because obviously there are none. So we will create a separate form of the member object that will be used only when the object is being created. To do this, I copy this form and then I will call this one editing. And this one will be creation. So for the creation form, we will remove the membership number attribute. Move everything here. And we will also remove the loans attribute. Okay, this looks good. Now we can add a menu operation to manage members, just like we did it with items. But to make it more interesting, let's display both queries one after the other, immediately after we log in. So we will create a small dashboard. To do this, we open our visual perspective for staff members. And we'll add another content panel to our tab. Let's call it Members. And this one will be Items. So for the Items content panel, we will display the items query. And for the members content panel, we will display the members query. Now we need to remove the manage items operation from the menu as we don't need it anymore. Let's see now how this works. When we log into the application now, we can see that both queries are now immediately displayed. The second one is empty for now, so let's create a member. So now we see both queries displaying some data. In this tutorial, we looked at the first 6 use cases of the staff member user. We will look at the rest of the use cases in the next tutorial.